Listen, the story you were given is tidy. It says they rose, they fell, and the wind did the rest. But the bricks still hold their breath. If you crouch beside a broken wall at first light, you hear the city answer you, the hollow thrum under a covered drain, the clean rasp of baked brick against your palm, the faint chill lifting from a well that has not tasted rope in 1,000 years. They did not vanish. We stopped listening. If you love ruthless, evidence-first alternate timelines, subscribe to What If Wars. We build futures out of facts, then dare them to breathe. Walk with me down a lane that keeps its promises. Mohenjo-daro draws straight lines across the earth, as if someone once pinned the horizon and measured toward it. Streets intersect like graph paper, orthogonal, predictable. The brickmakers knew the beat. 1, 2, 4, the common proportion. 1, 2, 4, pressed into clay and fired hard enough to become muscle memory for a civilization. Your feet learn it before your mind does. Houses open into cool rooms and small courtyards. Water set within reach. Privacy arranged without fuss. Each threshold low, each standard high. A drain slips beneath you, capped and snug, carrying what must leave to where it can be forgotten. You don't see the system so much as feel its absence when you step away. That's the point. Good design hides its own labor. Harappa offers its hand differently. A weight, smooth and dark, fits the curve of your palm as if it were made yesterday. Another, a shade lighter, stacks its certainty on top. Binary tendencies, decimal habits, a quiet choreography of numbers repeated from workshop to market to dock. Measuring sticks straighten a seller's story. Metrological consistency does what armies often fail to do. It makes strangers cooperate without knowing each other's names. How many conflicts evaporate when everyone agrees what a pound is? How many risks become possible when trust can be weighed? You kneel and lift a steatite seal. It warms quickly. On one face, an animal with a horn that bends like a crescent, sometimes called a unicorn, sometimes a bull. Above it, a short, stubborn line of signs no one living can read. Undeciphered does not mean unused. The seal closes ajar. It marks a bale. It moves with a caravan and a ledger in a mind, not yet on paper. You can almost hear the soft approval as it sinks into damp clay, a sound like a promise being notarized. Somewhere over water, a scribe in a different language writes Meluhha, and a broker nods. Somewhere closer, a clerk counts with those same weight stones and smiles when the last mark balances the first. Dholavira teaches you to read water the way a healer reads a pulse. Step down into a reservoir that holds the sky in slices. Each stair is a date, each margin a decision. Spillways know their temper. Floods are redirected with the assurance of people who have watched the same tantrum 100 times and learned to keep their voice level. City-scale hydraulics are not romance. They are routine. What if routine is the most radical technology of all? What if the habit that keeps drains clear is the habit that keeps empires alive? You taste their agriculture on the air. Wheat husk, barley malt, the earthy calm of pulses that repay the soil they borrow from. Sesame oil glints in shallow bowls like bottled sunlight. Cotton brushes your wrist with a coolness that makes heat survivable and commerce desirable. Later, on the tougher edges, millets laugh at bad rain. These choices are not accidental. They are strategy disguised as dinner. You look for the swagger of conquest and find something rarer: restraint. Copper and bronze tools crowd the ground. Chisels, blades, fittings, works vocabulary, not a war poem. There is limited evidence of large-scale weaponry or militarism here, compared with neighbors who love to brag. The brag in these streets is different. Covered drains, street channels, soak pits, wells so frequent in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa that your thirst becomes a scheduling problem, not a crisis. What happens to a people who make cleanliness a civic instinct? What happens to a mind that trusts tomorrow's water? The hook you feel in your ribs isn't myth, it's measurement. It's the way standard bricks teach the eye to expect right angles. It's the way a seal turns a handshake into a contract. It's the way a drain convinces you that waste is not destiny. Stand still a moment and hear the city speak its 3 verbs: plan, standardize, flow. If you master those, you don't need a crown to run a country. You need a calendar and a conscience. Yet under this order, there is a tremor, and you must feel it to understand the wager we're about to make. The monsoon does not sign agreements. Some years it clears its throat and never sings. Some years it shouts at the wrong time. Fields wait, then wither. Wells drop by a knuckle, then two. Reservoir steps go from damp to bright to too hot to sit on. A city counts its year not by festivals, but by how many stairs down you must go to find the waterline. 1 extra step is a warning, 2 is rationing. 3 is a rumor turning into a plan you hoped never to use. How many offbeat rains can a grid endure? Rivers don't keep to lanes either. Channels braid, split, and abandon their beds like caravan leaders changing routes at dusk. The Ghaggar-Hakra, wrapped in debates and old names, might feed a port or walk away from it. Silt arrives where depth was promised. A dock remembers the weight of boats and hears only wind. Do you chase the water or teach it to pause? That single question can redraw a map. Distant smuggles risk into wealth. Trade to Mesopotamia brings tin and buyers, but it also brings their storms, their wars, their pauses. A single week season across the Gulf can turn carnelian beads into red inventory that won't move, and cotton into soft debt. How long before vouchers become arguments? How long before arguments become scarcity? Metal sets a ceiling you cannot charm your way through. Copper wears. Bronze answers only to heat you can reliably hold. Kilns adapted from bead furnaces flare bright, but a few degrees shy is the difference between a fitting that holds and a failure that costs a harvest. You can arm a town guard. You cannot terrify a continent. You will need a different face of power, the kind that looks like floodwalls and schedules instead of spears. And then there is the elegance that can betray you, soft rule. Many cities, shared habits, familiar bricks, weights, drains. No single voice that shouts across the plain and is obeyed. Councils govern their squares beautifully. Guilds guard standards with pride. Festivals stitch calendars together. It is stability, until a drought wants a canal that crosses jurisdictions, or a flood demands a wall bigger than any one town can pay for. Consensus is slow when the river is fast. So here is the line we will walk. If these people learn to widen their instincts, if they scale Dholavira's reservoirs into a network, if they treat floodwalls as levees and policy, if they time convoys to the monsoon and write quarantine into the harbor yard, if they turn seals into tax and weights into law, then order becomes resilience. If they don't, the map fractures and the drains sing to no one. Can plumbing outlast swords? Can standards outvote storms? You already know which answer you want. Hold 3 images with me. A floodwall that will decide a city's fate on a night when the rain arrives sideways. A convoy rule that will keep a famine from ever getting off the boat. A small clay token that stands in for trust so well that 2 strangers will stake their futures on it. We will earn each of them. Not with miracles, not with iron pulled out of the wrong century, but with tools they held and the patience they practiced. For now, listen to the covered drain. Feel the 1, 2, 4 settle under your feet. Let the seal warm in your hand. The past is offering you a lever. In the next breath, we will see where to place it. You start where the stones remember water. Dholavira rises in tears, not for spectacle, but for storage. You step down into a reservoir, and the air cools, as if the city has kept a secret shade for you, alone. The stairs have edges softened by hands and seasons. The margins cut with an engineer's patience. Spillways notch the walls like calm instructions to a river that forgets itself each year. You trace a channel with your fingers and feel the slight fall of gradient, a confidence that says, take this way, not that. This is city-scale hydraulics without a slogan. It does not beg to be noticed. It just works. Which is louder in the end, the shout of a king or the hush of a drain? You lift your head and notice how water and street agree. Orthogonal lanes do not fight the slope. They borrow it. Gutters run where they should, capped where they must, turning danger into routine. In Mohenjo-daro, wells punctuate neighborhoods with the regularity of a heartbeat. In Harappa, the pattern is similar. Private wells, public wells, a civic reflex that treats thirst as a scheduling problem, not a crisis. A covered sewer draws away refuse so neatly that the only drama is the moment you lift a cap and hear the hollow echo. That echo is a promise kept. Trust here has a weight. In a market shade, a merchant places a dark stone on a balance, then another, then a fraction of another, binary tendencies, decimal habits, until the crossbeam settles level. Measuring sticks wait like straight-backed witnesses. You know these stones have twins in other stalls, other towns. That sameness turns strangers into partners. How many weeks of negotiation vanish when both sides believe the scale? How many roads open when measurement becomes a language? You step into heat and find it purposeful. A bead furnace glows, carnelian inside shifting from stubborn stone to soft ember. A craftsman draws the heat out and the bead with it, drilling a neat channel the width of a breath. The colors settle to a red so clean it almost hums. Trays of finished beads lie like patient embers, destined for necks and wrists, but also for ledgers, because fashion has always been a kind of currency. Cotton waits nearby in bales that smell faintly of green rain. Twist, spin, weave. A bolt of cloth cools your wrist, and you understand why a buyer across the sea might write a letter with your city's name in it. The letter's destination is real enough to feel. Across water, in a world of reeds and baked tablets, a scribe writes Meluhha, and a broker nods. Long-distance exchange is not a rumor here. It is a routine, a season. Boats ride the monsoon like a timetable you can't print but can predict. Along the coast, Makran, Kutch, Saurashtra, Gujarat, entrepôts make a chain of decision points. A ship can pause, repair, wait for wind, and a city behind it won't starve for the delay. Redundancy hides in geography, the way drains hide under streets. At Lothal, the rectangular basin sits with a stubborn geometry, often interpreted as a dockyard. The debate keeps scholars honest. The basins keep your picture honest. Walls that could hold water, edges where boats could lean, warehouses close enough to smell salt and wet clay. Which detail matters more, the name you give the basin or the network it implies? In a counting house that has no paper but leaves no doubt, a clerk warms a steatite seal between forefinger and thumb. Animal motif. Short line of signs, undeciphered and unyielding. The seal meets damp clay with a soft, decisive sound. Jars close. Bales claim identity. Cargo becomes contract. If literacy is power, what do you call the power that turns an unread sign into a trusted transaction? You call it standardization. You call it memory in mineral form. The script may have kept its secrets, the system did not. Agriculture threads under all this, like a baseline you don't notice until it stops. Wheat and barley in honest, workmanlike fields. Pulses that give back to the soil what last year's harvest took. Sesame bending in a breeze, oil like bottled sunlight, waiting in the seed. Cotton that turns heat into commerce, loom into wage, wage into more cotton. On the dry margins, millets nod, small and stubborn, proof that a menu can be a plan. You watch an old man pour a palm of seed into a boy's hand, the exactness of it, the way both glance at a weight nearby without saying a word. Is a civilization a place, or is it the way two people agree to measure a handful? You search for the parade ground that brags about conquest and find something else. Workrooms, courtyards, streets that sweep themselves with slope, copper blades that fit a calloused grip, bronze fittings that answer to heat and time. There is limited evidence here for large-scale militarism compared to neighbors who told their victories in stone. The loudest story is quieter, drains that remember the monsoon, reservoirs that remember a drought, weights that remember a price, seals that remember a debt. What if memory, standardized and shared, is more durable than fear? A breeze shifts and brings the smell of kiln, salt, and wet rope. You follow it to the edge of a basin and see the outline of a logistics lesson ahead of its time. Bonded warehouses, call them that if you like, by function if not by name. Goods enter, wait, change hands, and leave without chaos. A courtyard near the water offers space for inspection, for quarantine if needed. You picture a dockmaster with a reed tucked behind his ear, counting days until the wind turns. He doesn't command armies, he commands timing, which changes history more often. You keep noticing small domestic proofs that scale when repeated. A soak pit that swallows a courtyard's waste and returns silence. A street-level channel that intercepts a sudden rain before it becomes a panic. A lane aligned to let wind pull heat out of a block of homes without anyone mentioning architecture. Multiply each decision by hundreds of lanes, thousands of days, and you have a way of life that feels inevitable until the sky decides otherwise. Then inevitability becomes a test. You pause at noon, and the city answers with shade. A woman draws water from a well that has served 3 generations, her hands moving in a rhythm taught by the well itself. A boy runs his fingers along the edge of a brick 1-2-4 and smiles as if he has discovered a secret when all he has done is recite policy. Somewhere a broker checks a weight and hears the faint click of agreement. Somewhere a bead maker listens to the kiln and decides the bead needs one more breath of heat. This is how a civilization actually sounds. You could stop here and call it a museum. You won't, because evidence is not a wall text. It's a set of tools still warm from use. The reservoirs, the drains, the weights, the seals, the beads, the cotton, the roots. They are not curiosities. They are levers, already shaped to human hands. The question isn't whether they existed. The question is what happens if you scale the habits behind them, if you let the routine become a republic. And then you remember the tremors we felt, the monsoon's offbeat, the river's wandering mood, the fragility of a far market, the hard ceiling of bronze, the elegance and hazard of consensus. Can this toolkit handle that weather? We are about to try. One stressor, one fix. No miracles, no anachronism. A reservoir learns to think like a city. A floodwall becomes a promise, not a panic. A convoy turns wind into schedule. A tax becomes a seal. A league grows from a habit. Hold the bead's slow glow in your mind a moment longer. It's time to cool it into shape. The first year the monsoon misses its cue, people are polite about it. They say the wind is shy, that the sea needs another week to remember itself. Wells drop by a finger width, and no one panics. Reservoir steps shine a little higher in the sun. Fields drink what they can and pretend not to want more. The second year, the politeness frays. A woman descends 3 steps instead of 2, and pauses because it feels like a confession. A bead furnace is banked earlier than usual. The craftsman listens to the ember and hears a doubt. The third year, the city starts counting out loud. Rations are not yet rations. They are carefulness. But carefulness has a taste. You can feel it on your tongue. Which breaks first, the sky's promise or the habit that trusted it? Then the rain returns the way a careless guest returns a borrowed thing. Late, loud, wrong. It arrives in a week instead of a season, a fist instead of a hand. Streets that were meant to carry water like a parent, carries a sleeping child, now have to catch it like a dropped knife. Gutters fill, covered drains hum. The soaked ground turns slick. The reservoirs take the first rush, then the second, then ask for the third to be gentler. You stand on a stair and watch the waterline jump like a pulse gone irregular. What saves a city more often, walls or choreography? Rivers add their own insult. A channel the color of tea decides on a new course, as if the old one were an old joke. Silt lifts, slides, and settles in the exact place a boat needs depth. A dockhand throws a rope, and it lands on mud that wasn't there last season. A town built on a promise of water learns that promises are only as good as the last flood. The Ghaggar-Hakra, whatever name you favor, plays a long game of now you see me, now you don't. Maps lose their temper. Surveyors lose their sleep. If your grid is law, what do you call a river that refuses to read? You turn to trade for relief and learn what distance does to certainty. Across the Gulf, the buyers have their own weather, their own kings, their own silences. A ship that should have nose-kissed a Lothal quay by the new moon is still a rumor on the horizon. Carnelian beads pile up like obedient soldiers with no orders. Cotton waits in bales that begin to smell too much like last month. A clerk touches a seal and doesn't press, not yet. And that tiny pause becomes the city's posture. Accounts go from numbers to negotiations. A market that ran on the hum of repetition stutters. How many quiet docks make a famine? Metal answers only to heat and time, and both feel shorter when nerves are long. Copper forgives a little and then stops. Tin is a friend of friends. You don't meet it often and never by accident. Kilns adapted from bead furnaces flirt with the temperature you want, and back away at the moment you need them to hold. A bronze fitting in a floodgate fails at the hinge instead of beyond it. A blade that should have made 20 clean cuts requires a 20th stroke with a curse hidden in the breath. You can defend a street, yes, but you cannot scale that defense into spectacle, into the kind of menace that buys you peace by being expensive to challenge. What do you threaten with when your sharpest tool is a schedule? And then there is the problem that looks like a virtue until you need it to sprint. Councils in separate cities do their jobs beautifully close to home. Guilds keep standards like holy things. Ritual calendars braid communities together in a way that feels like inevitability. But inevitability stumbles when a canal must cross a boundary or when a flood demands a wall that touches more than one jurisdiction. A meeting is called another. The river does not attend. The monsoon does not reschedule. Delegates with clean ledgers and clean consciences debate the fairest way to share a burden that is already at the door. Consensus is a warm fire in winter. In a storm surge, it is a candle. You feel the strain where habits meet hazard. A farmer's hand stops a heartbeat longer over the seed jar. A dockmaster marks a day on a wall with a fingernail because chalk is too official for the fact he is admitting. A beadmaker hears the kiln's thin whistle and knows it is the whistle of a belt pulled too tight. These are not dramatic failures. They are friction, the kind that burns when you rub against it long enough. You walk a lane at dusk and feel the city counting itself. Wells, drains, bricks, weights, seals. Inventory is comfort, but comfort is not immunity. A child asks why the river moved and no one says, because it loves freedom. They say, because it does. The difference matters. You cannot negotiate with physics. You can only answer it with policy. So you bring the 5 pressures into focus like a hand in front of your face. The monsoon that misses, then overcorrects. The river that revises. The trade line that stretches trust until it thins. The bronze that holds until it doesn't. The governance that shines in peacetime and stutters when the boundary line matters more than the deadline. Each is survivable on its own. Together, they lean. Together, they turn a grid into a question mark. What do you do with a civilization that already speaks fluent standardization? You let it answer in its native tongue, not with miracles, not with leaps, but with scaled instincts. If a reservoir can remember a season, can a network of reservoirs remember a decade? If a dock can wait a week for wind, can a chain of entrepôts wait out a regional shock? If a seal can stand in for a person, can a token stand in for a tax and a promise? If a flood wall can turn water, can it turn malice by existing? If a guild can protect a rule inside a quarter, can it arbitrate one across a coast? You arrive at the edge where evidence ends and agency begins, and the city looks back at you as if to say, we were always going to have to decide. Tomorrow, we answer. One stressor, one fix. Nothing we haven't already held in our hands. Begin with water, because water is the first truth. You stand at Dholavira and decide not to admire the reservoirs. You clone them. The city teaches you proportion. You return the favor with scale. A league of towns agrees on one set of dimensions. The same brick ratios, the same gradients, the same spillway widths, so every reservoir sings in the same key. Buns rise where seasonal torrents gather, not as panic walls, but as embanked levees with measured toes and crests. Overflow corridors are cut into the street plan on purpose. Lanes that look ordinary until the sky tips, and they turn into safe rivers that know exactly where to go. Near major channels, one-way flap drains are hinged like eyelids. Open when the city must breathe out. Shut when the river tries to cough back. Access descends in steps, proto-stepwells that hold shade and dignity at once. So a woman can climb to water without turning thirst into spectacle. You staff it too. Sluice watchers learn to read the meniscus like a ledger. Guilds appoint keepers of flow the way others appoint guards. The first time the monsoon goes sideways, you don't beg. You choreograph. When someone asks what saved the city, You do not say prayer or miracle. You say standardized masonry and a schedule. Rivers are moodier than rain, so you answer mood with patience. You don't chase the channel, you teach it to hesitate. Upstream of your docks, you bite a series of sediment traps into the floodplain, broad, shallow basins that drink the first fury and spit out silt where you decide, not where the river does. Movable levees, nothing romantic, just earth and brick in modules, push the main current back toward depth where you need it most. Between sister towns, you dig lateral canals that behave like detours when the river chooses drama over duty, linking basins so a boat can cheat the tantrum without leaving the network. You designate sacrificial fields that belong to the river on loud years and to millet on quiet ones. The map learns to flex. Docks at Lothal-like basins get a winter ritual: dredge, measure, certify. A clerk presses a seal into a clay tag that says, "This key is true to depth." It isn't poetry, it's a promise. How often does history change because someone knew where to drop a shovel? Distance is a liar when you have only one road, so you refuse the single road. Along the Makran, Kutch, Saurashtra, Gujarat coast, you string entrepôts like knots tied in the same color thread. Each port is close enough to the next that a damaged ship is an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. Monsoon-time sailing becomes law, not luck. Departures move in windows that everyone respects, not because a priest declares it, but because the wind has the last word, and the clerk understands that better than any omen. Convoys leave together, 2-ship minimum across risky legs, 3 when the season feels off. Harbor courtyards sit between dock and warehouse, open to air and rules. Inspection, quarantine, accounting, 3 acts of the same play. Bonded warehouses sit under seal. A bale can change owners without moving an inch. And the city still eats if a sail rips offshore, because the tax and the transfer are real, even when the wind is not. Customs tokens, clay marked with seals, stand in for silver you don't need to see to trust. A diaspora of Meluhha brokers keeps a double map in their heads, channels and relationships. If a buyer in Mesopotamia goes silent, a cousin in Oman opens a door. Redundancy becomes invisible as habit. Which breaks first, an ocean or a network? Metal does not answer vows, only temperature, so you steal heat from the future by widening the past. Bead furnaces already reach bright. You learn to hold that brightness steady for bronze. Kiln masters keep logs the way scribes keep prayer lists. Fuel stacks counted, draft angles noted. Clay liners replaced by schedule, not superstition. Tin arrives pre-weighed, pressed into small biscuits with a guild mark. Copper and tin meet like partners, not strangers. Standardized gauges, simple rods with notches. Test fittings at the foundry, not in the flood. Gates earn their place in a floodwall. Blades earn their market day by surviving a set cut on a standard post. Defense wears work clothes. Town guard militias drill with simple composite shields. Wood and hide with bronze or horn accents bright enough to say "no farther" without pretending to be an army that never existed. Floodwalls double as deterrent ramparts. Height and thickness speak a language raiders understand, even if you never raise your voice. You do not conquer anyone. You make it expensive to bother you. What scares a thief more? A spear he can outnumber, or a system he cannot exhaust? The last fix is the one that looks like politics and turns out to be plumbing with a human face. You live with many cities and no single crown. You make that a strength. Guild councils from Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dholavira, Lothal, and their neighbors convene on a calendar braided to festivals and sailing seasons. The League does not speak diktats, it speaks standards. Tariffs are standardized and posted. Weights are standardized and audited. Brick molds carry the same ratio from quarry to kiln across the map. Taxes appear as sealed receipts, small clay tablets stamped with a town seal and a weight series, so that a bale's duty can be proved by the thing itself, not by a memory likely to be argued. Arbitration courts sit at caravanserai crossroads. 2 merchants disagree, 3 guild elders listen, a seal is pressed, and the decision can travel farther than the voices that made it. Critical works, canals that cross jurisdictions, levees that protect a whole coast, trigger an automatic quorum. If one town petitions, 3 must answer, and the vote is counted in labor days pledged, not speeches given. Ritual calendars pull in the human heart. A great fair when the winds shift south, a second when they turn north. You turn cooperation into a season. When the river shouts or the sky refuses, a league that has already practiced coming together does not need to rehearse. What is sovereignty if not the power to move quickly toward the same task? Trade and governance braid into finance because trust likes tools. You formalize what every good market already does in miniature. Sealed jars and tally tokens move as credit. 10 jars sealed today can settle a debt next month if the token survives unbroken. Break the seal, and you break the promise. Merchant houses behave like guarantors. A cargo with their mark can pass 3 hands and come home to a profit anyway. Diaspora brokers, your Meluhhan interpreters by another name, make risk smaller by knowing who pays how and when. They are insurance in sandals. These are not inventions. They are formalized habits. And habits scale better than dreams. Now you run the fixes together and listen for dissonance. Water is choreographed so that drought bites slower and flood bites blunter. Rivers are managed, not tamed, their tantrums redirected into fields that agreed to take the hit. Trade is redundant and timed. No single port is a fatal point of failure. No single win the difference between feast and famine. Bronze becomes reliable, not legendary. Your fittings do not make songs, they make seasons. Governance becomes a metronome. When a wall must be shared, labor shows up because the calendar said it would. At each step, you use tools that fit their hands: brick, clay, rope, wood, copper, tin, wind, and the kind of math you can hold. You do not ask, is it enough? You ask better questions. How many days of food sit in guild granaries when the convoys run late? How many steps down to water before rationing begins? How many floodwall courses finished before the loud rains? How many arbitration courts needed for disputes per sailing season? You turn survival into numbers you can audit and a story you can teach to apprentices. A city that once trusted its drains to keep it healthy now trusts its standards to keep it alive. If all of this sounds less romantic than a charge of chariots, that's because it is. It is also why it works. An enemy can outflank a wall. No one outflanks a habit practiced by thousands. You are not building a miracle. You are building momentum. The night before the test, you walk a quay that smells of salt and damp rope. A clerk turns a seal in his fingers and smiles. He isn't remembering a king. He's remembering a rule. Tomorrow the sky will decide to be cruel. You have already decided to be ready. Dawn breaks with the sound of buckets and small talk. The city has learned to count differently. Reservoir keepers read the meniscus the way a broker reads a price. The first order changes are so ordinary they feel like weather. Fewer coughs in the lanes after the rains because the drains carry bad water away before it festers. The stepwells hold shade and dignity. Thirst does not turn into spectacle or rumor. Fields along the sacrificial margins take millet in a year. Everyone calls lean without shame. A boy who once followed his mother down 3 extra steps now pauses, surprised, because the waterline is higher than his worry imagined. It is a change you can mark with a toe. Trade hums with a different pitch. Convoys depart in windows you can set a meal by, and the city eats by that confidence. A damaged sail is an inconvenience, not a calamity, because the next port is near and the last port kept enough for a delay. Customs tokens click from palm to palm like small, portable laws. A bale never leaves a bonded store and still changes owners twice. The clerk smiles when the seal meets clay. He knows the jar's promise will keep across water and time. Carnelian beads leave in strands that look like fire braided into silk. Cotton returns as silver, then as timber, then as tin, never arriving as panic. You hear fewer arguments at the warehouse door. You hear more laughter. Bronze stops being a lottery and starts being a craft with a standard. Floodgates close without drama because the fittings are tested before the storm, not during it. A blade cuts its 20th stalk without swearing. Town guard militias drill in the cool of the evening and look like workmen on a different shift, which they are. They know how to move a crowd without breaking it. The floodwall stands at the city's edge and pretends to be a horizon. Raiders pretending to be armies look at it and agree with the wall. A system is exhausting to fight. Soft federalism turns visible. Festivals that once felt like a calendar page now feel like logistics disguised as joy. At the Southwind Fair, guild councils compare notes and seed labor to shared works with the same nonchalance they use to price sesame oil. Arbitration courts resolve disputes with a seal and a sentence that travels farther than its authors. When a lateral canal needs 3 towns' buy-in, nobody auditions sincerity. They show up with shovels because absence would look like theft. The League does not gild itself with titles. It paints lines on stone that tell water where to go. Second-order effects arrive like a chorus you didn't realize the song had been teaching you. Ritual calendars synchronize markets so cleanly that a boat captain can plan a career on wind alone. Shared weights knit distant kitchens and workshops into the same conversation. A recipe that works in Dholavira works in Lothal without translation. Diaspora brokers send nephews to cities where they are already expected. Risk shrinks under names spoken in 2 places at once. Cultural exports drift in on cargo manifests. Music that keeps a beadmaker's rhythm, civic rites that bless a drain before a bride, textiles that carry a coast's personality into a stranger's bedroom. Metallurgy inches forward the way grass does. Unfamiliar until you look back. Gauges more precise. Kiln liners stronger. Failures rarer. Every improvement is small. The sum is not. You promised a test. It gathers under a sky the color of melted pewter. The first sign is not thunder. It is quiet. The monsoon misses its first cue, then its second, and the air grows complicated. Wells drop by a knuckle, and rationing becomes a policy with no shame attached. Guild granaries open on a schedule. Tokens change hands, and the poor eat first because the rule says so. The diaspora brokers send word, hold cotton, ship beads. The buyers across the Gulf are paying better for one than the other. Convoys depart with ratios adjusted. 2 ships minimum on the risky leg, 3 when a captain's nose twitches at the wind. Then the sky changes its mind, and the rain arrives all at once like a sentence spoken through clenched teeth. Streets tilt into rivers as designed. Overflow corridors wake from their everyday disguises and learn again how to move a city's fear toward a safe place to spend itself. Sluice watchers take their stations without anyone shouting. One-way flap drains blink shut as the river tries to cough back into the city's lungs. Sediment traps bite the first fury out of a brown flood, and the docks hold depth where depth was promised because the dredging was done in the winter, not as an apology in summer. A floodgate's bronze hinge takes the load and does not fail. The flood wall saves a neighborhood and then another because it is as tall as the argument we had months ago about how tall it needed to be. Which matters more, the speech a leader makes on the wall, or the extra course of brick that leader insisted on when the sky was blue? Panic tries to take shape and finds no room. A rumor runs into an arbitration court and loses its urgency to a seal and a ledger. A grain dispute lasts 7 minutes, because the rulebook gives it 6 and a clerk who has been awake for 20 hours gives it 1 more out of courtesy. Convoy relief arrives in the 2nd week. Bread, oil, reassurance, and the city treats it not as charity, but as a dividend on dues paid in ordinary years. The flood wanes. The drains clear their throats and sing. The reservoirs recover in steps the way they emptied. You stand on a stair and watch the waterline settle exactly where the dignity of the place expects it to. How often does a plan become a person's peace of mind? When the sky goes quiet, a different quiet follows, the kind after a successful surgery. You tour the damage and find it measured. The sacrificial fields have done their work and will do millet next season. The lateral canal that seemed expensive last year has a line of boats today that turns a problem into a port. The flood wall did not only turn water, it turned malice. The raiders who tested an outlying town's nerve decided they were not paid enough for this flavor of trouble. The city counts losses in a language it invented. Labor days, seal tokens, brick courses to be replaced. The numbers are not kind, but they are not chaos. Chaos is the thing you beat. You lift your eyes and realize you are no longer describing a cluster of towns in deep time. You are describing a republic of habit that has arrived without needing to declare itself. In the present shaped by that stubborn competence, the coast is a necklace of ports, Makran to Kutch, to Saurashtra to Gujarat, each a pearl with its own luster, all strung on monsoon wind and civic memory. Civic water ethics sit in the heart the way songs do. Children learn to read the meniscus before they learn to recite a prayer. Customs tokens have become coin and then something better than coin, because the trust behind them survived more storms than any king ever did. Festivals double as budget meetings, and no one feels cheated by that. Power is not far away. It is the rule you can reach with your hand. You walk a quay at evening and feel the future in the humidity on your face. A clerk turns a seal in his fingers out of habit and puts it down smiling. A pilot tests the air with his jaw and nods. The convoy will leave at dawn. A bead maker holds a red thread against a bolt of cotton and decides it is the right season to be brave. Somewhere an elder tells a child why the floodwall curves the way it does, and the child, bored by safety, rolls their eyes and still remembers. This is not destiny. It is practice. Before we part, answer one last question with me. Which empire lasts? The one that shouts its victories into stone, or the one that whispers its standards into everything? You already know. If this vision moved you, if you want more timelines where evidence does the heavy lifting and imagination runs only as far as the facts allow, subscribe to What If Wars. We build futures out of things that worked, then we test them until they do.